Mongolia, the 19th largest country in the world. Half its population resides in its capital city, surrounded by massive swaths of empty land. And while it's most famously associated with the escapades of Genghis Khan, it's what Mongolia is doing now that's putting it back front and center in a rising new world. It recently caught the eye of Elon Musk, who approvingly shared with his massive audience a new government initiative that's resulted in an extraordinary baby boom happening right now in the region. Until recently, Mongolians always had a very high birth rate, averaging just over 7 children per woman, akin to something we'd see among the Amish population here in the States. But all that changed in the early 90s. That number dropped dramatically to just around 2 children per woman. Now, most scholars attribute that decline to the legalization of abortion around that time, as well as high unemployment and economic turbulence. But since the early 2000s, there's been a dramatic pronatal turnaround, with birth rates surging once again past the 3-child per woman mark, well above the population replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. And one of the reasons for this turnaround is a profound process known as retraditionalization. Since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Mongolians have increasingly been returning to their nation's culture, customs, and traditions as a way of reigniting a distinctively Mongolian civilization. In fact, many people don't know, but back in 2017, Mongolians elected as their president the nationalist populist candidate Butaga Koltma, a former judo wrestling champion who many called the Mongolian Donald Trump. And as part of that retraditionalization, Mongolian motherhood has gone through a process of re-sanctification. Motherhood is now honored in an annual ceremony by the Mongolian government, and that place of honor has served to inspire and promote pronatal sentiments throughout their nation. Now, of course, as many of you know, what's happening in Mongolia in terms of deliberate efforts by their government to promote fertility and population growth is actually happening around the world in places like Hungary, Russia, the nation of Georgia, all of whose governments have been offering all kinds of tax incentives, financial incentives to encourage families to boost their reproductive populations. And those efforts have indeed been largely working. Hungary's birth rates have gone from an historic low of just 1.2 children per woman to now nearing 2 children per woman. But as Mongolia shows, it's not tax incentives alone that will solve the problem of depopulation long term. Something else far more powerful is doing precisely that. But first, gang, do you ever wonder how people like Nancy Pelosi seem to know exactly when to buy certain stocks? How politicians seem to have secret knowledge to what's going to do well in the market? Well, it's all insider trading. Pelosi and her cronies have been getting away with it for years. But guess what? You and I actually have access to that very same inside information. Thanks to a little SEC loophole, we can track what the big corporate CEOs are buying up in real time. Then we can just ride their coattails into financial success legally and ethically. Once you learn the secret of the trade, you're in. To do that, you've got to join me along with my good friend and trading expert, Ross Givens, this Thursday, August 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Ross is the real deal. His insider tips have led to returns of over 200%. Some have hit as nearly 1,500%. It's going to be huge, but seats are limited. Click on that link below right now. Snag one of the remaining seats. This is going to change your life, gang. You don't want to miss it. The fundamental problems, indeed the crisis that depopulation presents to any civilization, has been detailed most recently in an essay by American Enterprise Institute scholar Nicholas Eberstadt entitled The Depopulation Bomb. At the heart of this crisis is the loss of what Eberstadt refers to as social churn, which refers to the dynamism of a society, the way it's able to churn out new businesses, new startups in relation to the existing number of enterprises or businesses, new technologies, new educations. What we've been seeing of late, particularly in the Western world, is a very noticeable and steady decline in our churn. For example, our change of residence, an indicator that we're moving up in the world, in our careers, today is at a 30-year low. Our education system, once the wonder of the world, is now at the bottom of all worldwide industrialized nations. Recipients of government programs like Social Security and Medicare, the recipients are beginning to outnumber those taxpayers who fund those programs. And the number of startups to existing businesses is again at an all-time low. This is precisely the civilizational decline that Elon Musk has been warning about with regard to falling birth rates. But perhaps nowhere do we see the disastrous consequences of depopulation for Western powers more shockingly than in what recently happened in Afghanistan. One of the major reasons for the Taliban's victory, often overlooked by analysts, is that the Afghan population is significantly younger than American and Western populations. The median age among Afghans today is 18, in stark contrast to the United States, which is 38, or Britain, which is 40. And there are two significant factors entailed in this age difference. First, given that the Taliban were deposed 20 years ago, at least half of Afghan men and women weren't even alive when the Taliban last ruled, which at least in part explains their current popularity. Secondly, nations made up of 18-year-old men are far more prone to fight than nations comprised of tired old 40-year-olds. The relative youthfulness of the Taliban meant that they were able to effectively wait out the American and NATO occupation. All the while, the relatively older American population grew increasingly tired and impatient with prolonged military campaigns overseas. But what's so key here is why the Afghan population is so young. Well, simply put, it's because of the degree of fertility among the Afghan people. In his landmark 2013 study, Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth?, University of London scholar Eric Kaufman documented how relatively low fertility rates among Soviet women was one of the key factors that led to the Soviets' eventual defeat in Afghanistan. Russian mothers, unwilling to sacrifice their only son, became vocal opponents against the Afghan campaign. All the while, Afghan fighters came from families with an average of 7 or 8 children. Families with one child are far more hesitant to fight than families with several children. But as Kaufman went on to observe, while birth rates have plummeted in secular progressive populations, high fertility rates among conservative religionists are awakening a religious renewal all across the globe, the likes of which the world has never seen. A renewal that's now effectively pushing back against the secular society of liberal globalism. Said differently, rising fertility among religious populations along with falling fertility among liberal globalist populations is contributing to the awakening of a new traditionalist and conservative world, just like we're seeing in Mongolia. And so, as it turns out, the way forward is to turn back. Those populations that are embracing their religious traditions are the ones that are experiencing the most profound and noticeable population renewal. And as such, their societies and economies are growing and increasingly thriving. Mongolia's re-embracing of religious tradition isn't a sign of a culture stuck in its own past. Rather, Mongolia is indeed proving itself to be the wave of the future.